to Bitcoin Podcast. The only one that's making your money is you. Listen to the Bitcoin Podcast. So hold on and listen to the Bitcoin Podcast. Hold on and listen to the Bitcoin Podcast. And you listen to the Bitcoin Podcast. And you listen to the Bitcoin Podcast Store. Everything must go. Buy now. March 31st, 2021. Will be the last day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Bitcoin Podcast. We have an interview for you today. We got Yago here from Sovryn.app. Yago, do the normal thing. Tell us about where you came from, how you got into Bitcoin, and give us maybe a quick introduction as to what Sovryn.app is.
Well, I got into Bitcoin because I believe that it's important. I sort of had like a paranoia that I live with that at any time, because the rules will change, or governments will find themselves in some kind of weird situation, or in the US, if you live in the US, anyone can sue you at any time. It's important that you have a way to maintain your financial sovereignty. And I believed that long before Bitcoin came around, but there was very little that someone could do before Bitcoin to make sure that they could maintain, their financial destiny and control over their funds without having to rely on some kind of bigger power, sort of like super mommy or daddy. So when I first read about the Bitcoin white paper, I came across it very randomly. I was working in network science at the time, and I was reading papers, and I came across the white paper, and it blew my mind. And that afternoon, I wrote an email to pretty much everyone I knew. I spammed everyone I knew, telling them that I thought this was going to be the most important thing in a generation, not just because it provides financial sovereignty, which is, I think, something that most people aren't aware of, but because we are rapidly moving towards a world where most of our lives are digital, and there's no way, and there was no way before Bitcoin to have actual digital assets. So between the calculation that the wealthiest, most astute people are always very well aware of the fact that they need financial sovereignty, and the fact that the entire world was going to be moving towards living their lives more and more digitally, I was convinced very, very quickly that this was going to be important. And so I emailed all my friends, and what they did very, very quickly was dismiss me. They all ignored that email.
We've all felt that.
Yeah. And so I've basically, gone through the same journey that pretty much everyone goes through, of going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And I can't, it's kind of crazy that I've been doing this, like falling down this rabbit hole for 10 years now, but here we are. Yeah. And so you asked about Sovryn, what Sovryn is. But so rewinding a little bit, I think what happened with a lot of people, especially in the earlier days, when they heard about Bitcoin, the next thing that they thought about was, okay, so I've got this sovereign monetary asset. Now, how can we transact with it in a way which is just as sovereign, which is just as P2P, just as much in our control. And so for a long time, people were constantly talking about different ways of doing decentralized exchanges, decentralized financial services, decentralized internet built on Bitcoin. And then it just kind of didn't happen. And to a great extent, it was because the technology wasn't there. Then, years went by, and some months ago, when the pandemic hit in February, a bunch of people who had known each other from the Bitcoin space for a long time came together, and we wanted to create a system where anyone could donate masks to anyone else, and we started building out this network of 3D printers because supply chains were shot. No one could get masks, and so we created this 3D printable mask, which was N95 compliant, and we started setting up a network of 3D printers globally, and then basically anyone could say, I need a mask. Anyone else in a different place in the world could say, I'll donate that mask to you, and then a third, and then that basically would get sent to a 3D printer in that country who could send it to them. And to construct all of this, we needed sort of like a more sophisticated way of managing these funds in a decentralized manner. And so we started working on that. And then in the course of that conversation, we also started talking about all of the things that, we kind of thought would happen and happened, thought would happen and didn't happen. And the thing that we kept on coming back to was that we have a decentralized monetary system, but a decentralized financial system for Bitcoin never emerged. And that, we were still waiting. And so at some point we just said, screw it, we're going to do it ourselves. And so mid last year, mid 2020, we began working on a Bitcoin native decentralized financial operating system, and that eventually came to be called Sovryn. And now it's been live for a couple of months. And for us, it was mostly, we didn't know if other people were going to really be that interested in it. We knew we wanted a way to lend and borrow, and so basically all of the people working on the project are pretty much all in crypto, all in Bitcoin. And so we all have the same twin problems. One is like, I need to pay rent, right? So how do I do that? I don't want to sell my Bitcoin. The way you can do that is you can lend yourself the money by basically collateralizing Bitcoin and borrowing dollars, right? But you want to do this through a decentralized platform. There wasn't any platform to do that. And then the second thing is we're all in Bitcoin, but we're extremely bullish in Bitcoin. How do you buy more Bitcoin if you don't have any fiat, if you're already all in Bitcoin? So what you can do is you can lever up your Bitcoin. But again, you don't want to do this on a centralized service, because then you're basically giving up your Bitcoin. And so those were the two use cases that we knew we wanted to focus on initially. And it just turned out that there's a lot of people out there who were waiting for this just like we were. And so communities exploded. There's like 100 different people working on the project now. A lot of excitement, and the ambition of the project is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's been a phenomenal, it's one of the most exciting things that I've ever been involved in, and I don't think I've ever had this much fun with the community.
All right. So before we get into questioning, because we have probably a lot of questions and like trying to figure out rationalizations behind how you've done it and why you chose those things. But we have queued up your video that's on the Sovryn.app website. I think it'd be fun to watch before we start diving into things.
Yeah, let's take a gander.
Give it a play, D.
In a world controlled by the fiat lords, centralized exchanges were inevitably corrupted. Only one force stood for
Love the style.
freedom.
One more Bitcoin.
Is that Corey?
Lambo.
Might as well be.
We'll help you. Give us your key. Trust us.
Lambo.
Remember, not your keys.
Not my coins!
Before it's too late. Sovryn, decentralized Bitcoin trading and decentralized Bitcoin lending.
I'm invading.
Defeat centralization, take back control.
Centralized wallet, don't be a hypocrite.
Money printer.
You won't see the bottom.
Stay sovereign.
Unless you change up. Satoshi gave us a code, and now we switch the game up.
Oh, there's a lot going on my YouTube.
There's a. I was looking at your website. I like the style and graphics of it all, making it kind of like a kind of comic book graphic novel.
Yeah, we've got a whole bunch of people creating art for it, and the video was made by the community, and there's a lot of excitement and creativity happening. It's very cool.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see come up with a project and watch how a community rallies around it and starts contributing to it.
Yeah.
Ways.
Yeah, it was really cool.
So
is that a badger? That has to be a badger.
That is the honey
Definitely
badger.
a badger.
Not
Definitely
just any badger, a honey badger, the money badger.
That's
badger.
really cool.
I like that. That's a good mascot to have, the money badger.
So
that's right.
Here's something that I've been wrapping my mind around lately, just because, finance is inevitable. It was invented for a reason, just like banks were invented for a reason. Like, these things exist for good reasons. And that is, how people protect themselves when they're lending out to others in the traditional world is the credit score, which is, not new. I mean, not old. Credit isn't terribly old.
Credit
is really old, but the credit score is relatively new, and even that's changing rapidly. But if I'm in a decentralized world and somebody is knocking on my wallet, how do I check their credit? Hey, am I gonna get paid back from this guy? How does it work? Maybe I'm thinking about it all wrong.
No. I mean, look. So I think it's a great question. So when you go to a centralized platform like BlockFi, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
You give them your Bitcoin, and what they do is they then give your Bitcoin to someone else in the form of a loan, right? Now, who they're giving it to is very often like a financial institution who want to arb Bitcoin or do market making or some kind of financial strategy that they have. And they want to borrow Bitcoin because it's cheaper than buying Bitcoin. And so BlockFi are relying on what is effectively a corporate credit score for that hedge fund or that market maker. But the issue is that then as a result, when you are lending, you're taking that type of risk, right? So, Bitcoin appreciates on average 200% a year. You're making another 6%, so you've gone from 200 to 206%. But you've taken the risk that something happens. One of BlockFi's customers go bankrupt, and now you lose your money. Maybe BlockFi go under, right? And it's not the way it works in a decentralized system, at least not right now, right? So maybe one day people will want to extend uncollateralized credit, but right now in Sovryn, all Bitcoin is collateralized. So if you want to borrow Bitcoin, you need to put down 150% worth of the value of that Bitcoin. So let's say you want to borrow a Bitcoin, you have to put collateral, let's say in the form of USD stablecoins, right? Valued at least 1.5 Bitcoin. So if you ran away with that Bitcoin, or if you fail to pay that back, the lender isn't just made whole; they actually make a profit because they will liquidate that position.
Mm. So the collateral is stable coins.
The collateral could be any token, any asset, right? So it could be various types of properties, and I think what we're going to see is, one of the things which I think is pretty exciting, for example, is a project to allow people to register properties on the blockchain and effectively put their house up as collateral. Another thing that could happen is art in the form of NFTs could become collateral. But the vast majority of the collateral right now is stablecoins and other types of digital assets. And sometimes that's Bitcoin itself. So sometimes people are levering up their Bitcoin, right? To get more Bitcoin exposure. So the key principle is that there is no fractional reserve. There is always more collateral than what is being lent out. And that massively reduces the risk to the lender.
Yeah, that's a kind of a staple of all of the current decentralized finance platforms that currently exist, is that I want to borrow something. I put down some type of collateral, and the amount of over collateralization, so whether it's 150%, 200, sometimes 600, depending on how volatile that asset is, I put that down. I then lock that away. I then get released whatever I'm borrowing. I do whatever I want with that. Some people then re-collateralize that for other more lending, for additional leverage, so on and so forth, right? I'm curious though, like, you built this on Rootstock, which is, I guess, a side chain of Bitcoin. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
And what's currently available on, like, using it on Rootstock?
You mean like the features that the system has?
I mean, like, what assets can you currently use? Is there a limitation to the assets that Rootstock can do, or like,
there's no limitation. Okay. Right now, there are very few assets. There's a handful of assets on the system, but that's about to change over the coming weeks. So we are constructing bridges to the Ethereum ecosystem, to the Binance ecosystem, to the Polkadot ecosystem, and effectively any digital asset will be able to migrate onto Sovryn and be traded there.
How do those bridges work? And is it different depending upon, I guess, what network you're bridging to? And is the collateralization rate, like the amount you have to lock up, going to be different for the various assets that you would lock up?
So the way the bridges work is funds are locked up on one chain. A proof of that lockup is passed to the other chain, and a new token representing the funds that are locked up, so it's basically a peg, is issued to the person who locked it up, to the address that locked it up. Mm-hmm. And what was the second question?
Shit, I forgot. Oh yeah, our collateralization rate's going to be like different for different assets, because like volatility across assets is 100% drastically different.
Yeah. So I don't think that. Yeah. So definitely, you always want to match the collateralization ratio to the volatility of the asset. I don't know that there will be dramatically big differences in the first few assets, but as more and more exotic assets are added with much higher volatility or potentially lower volatility, there will be differential or differentiated collateralization ratios required. Now, one of the cool things about, so there are other DeFi platforms, right, besides Sovryn. There's other platforms for decentralized finance. The majority of them are on Ethereum, but they're across all kinds of different chains. There's on Binance, there's on Avalanche, etc. One of the cool things about Sovryn, and one of the reasons we wanted to build Sovryn, was because when you have sort of a wrapped Bitcoin, like a centralized wrapping of Bitcoin, like WBTC, as you have on Ethereum, the collateralization ratio you get that is required is higher, because there's so much more risk in that kind of non-native Bitcoin, right? You're taking counterparty risk with BitGo. You're taking on the additional risk of the additional network, and so the collateralization or the loan to value that you're able to get for your Bitcoin is lower, and that's one of the big advantages. If you're looking to lend or borrow Bitcoin, Sovryn is able to offer the best price to risk ratio.
So you're saying that, like, your differentiation in this kind of lending ecosystem is that you're prioritizing Bitcoin as the main asset for borrowing or lending.
Yes, and that the system itself is secured by the Bitcoin network. So it's merge mined by the Bitcoin miners.
Because
so
that's based on like rootstock security being like pegged to Bitcoin.
That's right. Yeah.
So what kind of fees are you looking at? Because like, that's an obvious question as people start using these DeFi platforms. And with the majority of current liquidity and volume being happening on Ethereum right now, fees are an issue. So like it's elbowing out a lot of people who'd like to do maybe smaller amounts. What are the fees looking like currently on something like Sovryn?
They're about 1/100th of the fees on Ethereum, and they're going to get lower. So right now, for a typical transaction, you'll be paying between 20 and 60 cents of value. And we expect that to go down to sub 1 cent probably in May when we introduce roll-up technology.
So
I like the confidence
Rootstock-
with that answer.
So Rootstock is implementing rollups. Is that an additional layer 2, or is it built kind of? But yeah, I see.
It's an additional layer 2, yes.
Okay, so it's
So
like doing...
our approach is different from the Ethereum approach. And Ethereum started out, and even today, does almost everything on layer 1. This is extremely inefficient computationally, and as a result, the fees are extremely expensive. And one of the cool things that the Ethereum community has always had is sort of a sense of hyper-inclusivity, right? It's like everyone can be part of it. But in practice, the chain has become hyper-exclusive. Right? Almost no one can use it profitably unless they're like whales, because a transaction with a smart contract can easily cost you north of $200, $300 in fees. Just one transaction.
It gets up there, depending on how complex that transaction is.
That's right. But I'm talking about even some relatively simple transactions which are pretty gas efficient, like a Uniswap transaction can be north of $200. Right, more complex. Deploying a new contract can cost you $15,000, and that's a transaction fee.
It cost me quite a bit just to do a simple swap 2 days ago. Tried to hit it when the gas was low, but yeah, you're right. It's pricey.
Yeah.
Go on.
There's no argument here. The current state of Ethereum, the way things are currently operating, it's very expensive to use. Like you said, it makes it very exclusive. Because people can't do things other than very large amounts of amount transactions.
That's right. Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's always going to be that way, because there are other things. But it remains to be seen how well those work and where things go in that particular ecosystem. So I'm curious what is the difference? Why is this not going to happen on Rootstock? Like you were going to get into.
So the reason it's unlikely to happen on Rootstock is because there's almost no activity. So right now we're running on sort of what you could call Rootstock layer 1. But even we're putting together the infrastructure to make sure that we are able to migrate to a layer 2 solution within weeks. Mm-hmm. And so I think that you're never actually going to see the emergence of this idea that you use and deploy the vast majority of transactions and computational complexity on layer 1, and so that's one reason. There's a more fundamental reason in that I think one way to think about Rootstock is that Rootstock itself is a rollup. So by merge mining with the Bitcoin miners, right? Bitcoin miners are doing this proof of work anyway, and the Bitcoin sidechain can piggyback off of that. And there's nothing stopping you from having 2 or 3 piggybacks, right? Using exactly the same hash power. And so the sort of sharding that Ethereum talk about looking to achieve with their entire POS sharding mechanism effectively already exists for Bitcoin if you're using sidechains.
I'd have to think about that. I mean, because for those that don't know, like the nuts and bolts outside of the bridge from Bitcoin to Rootstock is an Ethereum virtual machine. So it's for all intents and purposes, it's a clone of Ethereum backed by Bitcoin consensus and somewhat of a distributed trust bridge from Bitcoin to Rootstock. And so that enables Rootstock to kind of piggyback on the innovations and development that are happening in Ethereum without being encumbered by kind of all the problems that currently exist because it's been used so much. So like the size of the state and all the like difficulties in managing that state and all those things don't exist on Rootstock because there isn't nearly as many people using it right now. But there's plenty of liquidity on it. Do you have any issues with liquidity? Like, can you give me an idea? Like, I have Bitcoin on Bitcoin, right? I want to use Sovryn. What is the time it takes for me to get my Bitcoin onto Sovryn and start using it?
If you're transferring under 3 Bitcoin, it's one Bitcoin confirmation is the amount of time it takes. And that's because we've constructed, not an hour, 10 minutes.
Okay, so like just one confirmation.
That's right, yeah. Larger transactions can be 3 confirmations or 6 confirmations. And that's because we've built a relay system, which we call FastBTC, the FastBTC relay. There are liquidity issues right now in the system. I would say the biggest issue we have is that there's a lot of liquidity that wants to be on the system that can't currently be on the system. And that's because the bridges aren't in production yet. And also the current rootstock peg RBTC is extremely limited and not as trustless as we would like. And so we're working to introduce a more trustless peg, which can have much great throughput. So I suspect that the liquidity issues are going to be resolved over the course of April.
If people want to use it, people will build it to make it better. That's usually how it goes.
Yeah.
I just, I mean, I've heard a lot of buzz about Sovryn in the past few weeks. I just keep hearing Sovryn this, Sovryn here, Sovryn there. And it does look like another viable option to allow all those Bitcoin maxis, all those Bitcoin people to actually do something with their Bitcoin instead of just sit on it. And
it's also not the situation where like they end up having to use Ethereum after shitting on it for so long. Like this is, if people who would like to stay in the Bitcoin world, this is a great way to do it. And if in the probably eventuality that other more exotic assets like real estate start getting pegged to these things and you can start putting that up as collateral, that's going to be
monumental.
large.
Like
because
you have
people
no
like
idea.
Bitcoin because it is the largest like liquidity. Like if you terms of like what's the word I'm looking for? Not liquidity. Like the most value is put in Bitcoin. It's usually what people hear first. So when they start thinking about what's the things I'd like to be more stable with or peg, whatever asset I have, it's usually going to be Bitcoin. Like way farther than anything else so far. At least the way that like the current like sentiment is around cryptocurrencies. And so like something like this that's more Bitcoin native is probably more likely where they end up flocking.
It's just so sexy to me that like these very, very advanced financial theories and financial practices are just being cartooned and gamified and launched on cryptocurrency networks, and they're working. Like if you were imagine you're an MBA in finance and you spend all that money and then you get out of school and you're like, wait, I just learned all that shit so somebody could turn into a cartoon badger. And like
anyone who's thinking of doing an MBA right now should take those 2 years and the 3 Bitcoin it would cost them, and just buy the Bitcoin and spend their time learning how to use that Bitcoin on a protocol like Sovryn.
Thank you for giving us the quote of the century, Mr. Yago.
Or get involved with a company that's doing these things so you have direct experience with this stuff.
That's right. Look, I mean, the thing is, like every single generation has like a really good decision that they can make, and if they just make that, like people who are living during that time, if they just make that one decision, they've sorted their lives, right? So like the generation that came back from World War II, the one thing that they needed to do was go to college. You went to college, you got a college degree, you were fine, you were set. The generation, their kids, the only thing they needed to do was, as they get their first job, they needed to buy a house, get a mortgage, buy a house, and then they were set, because that house is today worth $1, $2, $3 million, right? And a mistake that you can make is trying to do what your parents tell you because they know what was the one good thing for their generation was, but they don't know what the one good thing for your generation is. Our generation, it's not houses. All of the houses are too expensive. It's not a college degree. College degrees are too expensive, and they're also worth nothing anymore. They've been inflated away. The one thing that people of our generation need to do is just buy Bitcoin. Buy Bitcoin and think of it like a house or a college degree. It's not something you're going to sell. It's not something you're going to flip. It's not something you're going to trade. You just sit on it. You give it to your children when you die, and they're millionaires. That's it. That's all you need to do. We can end the podcast here. That's all you need to remember.
This man, Yago, I would like to have a beer with you one day. I hope I run into you.
With pleasure.
Whenever all this COVID shit's done, I'm thinking about hitting some conferences again. So maybe I might see you around. I have some actual, like, are you excited about the possibilities of like sovereign actually being leveraged for people too? I had an amazing conversation just the other day with one of my friends. He owns a lot of properties, right? And he went and he goes, you know what I want to do? I want to have just a big pile of money just in case I need that pile of money to make some risky decisions and buy things and do this. So he goes, yeah, I know. Like, I can't wait till I'm in that point where I'm like, you know what? I'd like a pile of money. Let me collateralize my shit real quick. So he goes to the banks and he's like, hey, here's 3 properties worth quite a bit of money. And I want to put these up for collateral. And I would like for you to give me greenbacks. So just in case, I can use these greenbacks and make some smart decisions. After a month of them going through his finances and everything, they came back and they were like, okay, so you offered us like just a super monumental high amount of value in collateral. We're going to give you like a Snickers bar. And like, of course, I'm not being literal here. I'm using metaphor.
No, of course.
But he goes, are you kidding me? And they're like, yeah, like that's all we want to do is give you, let's just use round numbers. Let's say he gave them like $750,000 worth of collateral. They hit him back with like $25,000 that they were going to lend him.
That bad? Wow.
And so
I've been in this world for too long, so I don't think I can work in the traditional banking industry anymore.
And so he said, this can't be right. And they said, yeah, that's all we could do. And he said, so you mean to tell me I get $25,000, and if my life gets catastrophic, you get $750,000 worth of property. Now the real numbers were closer to $500,000 and $50,000, but still. So he was like, it's like, to me. So at the end of that story, all I did was like, the traditional finance world is pretty fucked right now. Like, I don't think that they understand how fucked they are. If that's all they have to offer people who do have amazing credit, who do have amazing personal, like this person that I know, my friend is, he's not doing too shabby, and still the banks, all they could offer him to lend on his own property was like less than 10% of the value.
The thing about the banks right now is that the banks don't need to and don't really want to make loans if they can avoid it, and that's for 2 reasons. First of all, the interest rate is close to 0, right? So how much money are they going to make? It's more paperwork, it's more risk, it's more everything, right? And on the other hand, right, what the Fed is doing is it's paying them for the assets that they hold with the Fed, right? And the Fed's doing this to keep those assets illiquid right now. And that's part of what is helping to create this sense that inflation is low. And so we live in, there was that video, right? We talk about the fiat lords, right? The world is split between 2 forces. 2 opposing forces. You got the fiat lords who represent, the lies and the promises and the manipulations of the establishment. And that's, big government, and it's big banks and it's big corporates who are all intertwined. It's basically the old guard of the elite. And at the center of that is the Fed, which is able to create money for free and then hand it to there's like a shitcoin waterfall, right? But instead of like little ICOs, it's just the biggest ICO in the world, which is an ongoing ICO of the Fed and other central banks printing currency and giving it to their, the guys who are close to them, with the idea that it's supposed to trickle down. And then you have the people, the network, right? The power of networks, and that's Wall Street bets, it's Bitcoin, it's DeFi, it's the realization that anarchy can win, and these two forces have been fighting each other throughout all of human civilization, right? And usually it's the forces of the establishment, the forces of authority that win, and the forces of freedom that lose. Because the problem with freedom is if everyone's free, you can't organize. You can't tell, no one can tell you what to do. You can't get the masses together. And so that's why 20 policemen at a street corner can stop an entire mob of thousands of people, because they're organized. They have authority. They have someone telling them, where to stand. And the mob is just a mob. The amazing invention of Bitcoin is it is the most powerful coordination tool known to man. And it's entirely based on anarchy. It's the coordination of people who do not know each other, do not need to agree on anything, in fact, are competing with each other. Every single Bitcoin miner is competing with every other Bitcoin miner. Every single Bitcoin hodler is competing with every other Bitcoin hodler to hodl more Bitcoin. And yet, because of the way the game theory is structured, we're all working together and have been for 12 years now to take it from an asset which is worth nothing to an asset which is becoming the global reserve currency of the world and will become.
Number
What
3.
would you call it? Like the best coordinator? What is it doing to coordinate?
So all human coordination, all of it, democracy, dictatorship, aristocracy, the rules of the game Monopoly and the rules of the game chess, all forms of coordination are game theory, right? Basically, it's a set of incentives. What happens if you play by the rules? What happens if you don't play by the rules? Who gets to set the rules? That's all game theory. So how can one guy, it could be Fidel Castro, it could be Chavez, it could be Stalin, how does one guy control a nation of hundreds of millions of people and make their lives more miserable and stay in power? It's game theory. It's because he can reward the people who are close to him. Those people can reward, people further down the pyramid. And basically, there's like an old line from the movie Gangs of New York. The rich can always hire one half of the poor to kill the other half, right? And that's how the hierarchical power has always worked. Now, that idea, that core concept of one half can always band together to kill the other half, is inherent to the way Bitcoin works as well. That's why we call it the 51% attack, right? And that's why that's like the biggest danger. That's the boogeyman of Bitcoin or of any blockchain. And so the entire genius of Bitcoin and blockchain as a coordination mechanism is it's designed in such a way that no one is ever able to put together one half to kill the other half. And as a result, the power is distributed towards the edges instead of towards the center. And yet the edges all need to do, in order to earn, like a miner needs to earn their ability to be part of the network. And they do this by mining, and they get paid in Bitcoin, right? And so they're all working towards the same thing. The miners are employees of the blockchain. And every single Bitcoin holder is incentivized to tell everyone else about the amazing power of Bitcoin, because the larger the network grows, the more powerful it becomes, and the better off every single Bitcoiner becomes. And so the coordination mechanism is because we all have a single goal rather than we have a single leader. So it's rules without rulers.
I would agree. So like the majority of the reason why Bitcoin works is because based on the rules that are set up, it's more feasible to do what would be associated as the right thing. It's more profitable to do the right thing in Bitcoin. Overwhelmingly.
Yeah, it's
than
always
a bad
going
thing.
to be too.
Overwhelmingly. So like the incentives are set up in such a way that if you would like to maximize yourself personally, if you're a greedy person, your best case is to play by the rules, which ends up helping everybody.
Yeah.
So it's this kind of positive sum thing, and a realistic outlook that people are much more willing to benefit themselves over the community.
Yeah, and I think it's always going to
What's
be there.
interesting about that, though,
Yeah,
and like I like what you're saying. Like,
yeah, sorry.
The rules help the case that you can remove a large portion of the hierarchy, right? It's like because those rules exist the way they are, you can have a more anarchic community of people participate while still getting to the good, getting what the system would be considered the good. But the rest of the world still exists, right? Like, so it's a wonderful use case or example for how mechanism design and game theory come together to build a group of disparate people trending towards the good, or what the system would be considered the good. But how do you get the rest of the world who isn't doing that thing understand that and start to participate?
It's almost inevitable in a way, and the reason is because of sort of what I mentioned earlier, right? It's so there's always been this pendulum between the power of authority and the power of the individual, and the reason and authority is by its very nature usually going to have the upper hand, because authority,
it's efficient.
It's efficient. It accrues. It becomes like a gravity well for power, right? The more power it gets, the more powerful it becomes. But so why doesn't it all just collapse into dictatorships? And the reason is because there is a countervailing force, and that countervailing force is people don't want to kneel. And so you have to constantly spend that energy that is accruing into the energy well, right? To make sure that these individuals don't spin off, don't stop being under your control. And so at some point, most societies collapse because the contradictions become too great. What has happened, however, is I think a stunning thing. What Bitcoin has created is the first time that you have a coordination mechanism which doesn't accrue power to the center at all. In other words, there is no gravity well of power. And so there's no countervailing force to the force of every single individual, obviously wanting to prefer their own sovereignty, their own power. So what happens when you have suddenly the more powerful coordination tools are not in the hands of the authoritarians, but in the hands of the thousands and thousands of individuals who across a network don't want to be under the heel of an authoritarian? It's suddenly the pendulum maybe stops swinging. Now, I don't think it's that clean or it's that simple, but as sort of a first principles way of thinking about this is a situation that human societies at scale have never experienced. There has never been a coordination technology which was not hierarchical until Bitcoin. And so suddenly it's the anarchists who have the upper hand. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out.
It won't. It'll be fun, but it won't. Anarchy is not something that's realistic. I love it. It's
you're wrong.
juicy.
You're 100% wrong.
I would love to be wrong, but
no, you are 100% wrong empirically. Anarchy is the base state. Authority is the exception. And I got two examples for you. One, who is the global hegemon? Right now, there is no global hegemon. In most of history, there has been no global hegemon. In other words, countries live in a state of anarchy. Between countries, they deal with each other under anarchy, because no gravity well has been powerful enough to crew the gravity to hold the whole world together. The second empirical experience that you should be very familiar with is Bitcoin. Who's the center of gravity well of Bitcoin? Nobody. There's no CEO.
No.
There's no board of directors. There's no team. There's no nothing. And yet it is the fastest growing, best performing asset in human history. So how can you say that anarchy doesn't work? It doesn't just work. It's kicking everything else's ass. It just hasn't, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
It's growing. I've heard that quote. It's certainly growing, and it's growing really fast. But
don't get me wrong.
Come
I
to the
love
conclusion
this
that it's going to be the only thing that exists, I think is unrealistic.
Yeah,
I didn't say it was going to be the only thing. That's unlikely.
I think
right?
that
I'm taking it to I'm like being hyperbolic. I'm taking it to an extreme of like, okay, cool. Anarchy is by far, if we're going to make the assumption that anarchy is the best case scenario, then we can take it to another extreme that like, okay, then it's going to overtake everything. And the things that are
no, it's going to overtake
towards.
So what are the countervailing factors, right? Like what is it going to destroy? What is the opposite of anarchy?
When I say it won't, what I'm saying is that like don't get me wrong, anarchy was a huge impetus to me getting in this space. Me reeling off of anarchy being the mode of operandum is just because it doesn't work for most people. It just doesn't.
People have to care, and
I think that
people don't fucking care.
I think that things
centralize.
I think things centralize naturally. Human beings centralize things naturally, not out of people trying to get the one up on everyone, but human beings centralize things because it's easier, because we're just like water and electricity. We go the path of least resistance.
So
right?
I really appreciate what you're saying, and I think it's true, but it's true in our relatively limited experience. Any graph that you draw for any investor, the number one thing that they know is the past is not a predictor of the future. Now, you look at the internet. The internet was like this wild west of anarchy, and then you say, well, but look what's happened, right? Now it's basically Facebook and Google and Amazon, right? Mm-hmm. So there's this very powerful centralizing factor. Look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin started out totally decentralized, and now you've got Coinbase and Binance and Kraken and all of these centralized things, right? So there is this desire that people have to give up their freedom for the sense of security or convenience, and that's basically what has always started and created the gravity wells of power.
100%.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so is that going to continue? 100% to. It's 100% going to continue to one degree or another. But for example, Sovryn, right, is the ability now to do everything that you can do on Kraken or on BlockFi more cheaply with less friction, no need for KYC, right? And you keep your Bitcoin under your control. And it's controlled by the community, and you get additional incentives by earning tokens from being there, because we're distributing the power of the system in the same way that Bitcoin distributed the power of the system. So is it going to be able to successfully compete against decentralized systems? The answer is we don't know, but look at the trends. Uniswap has become on some days already, and it's 16 months old. On some days already, it is the largest exchange in the world. Not the largest DEX in the world, the largest exchange by volume and users in the world. And that's on an Ethereum system, which is too expensive for almost anyone to use, right? So it's true that people don't care, but people love convenience, and people like to have the feeling of freedom. And if you can give them security, convenience, and freedom in a package, they're going to choose that over just security and convenience every single time. So I don't think it says like, a 0 and 1. It's not like this is going to be total absolute victory. Woohoo, utopia is here. But what I'm saying is that the trend lines are changing.
I can definitely agree with that. And I would say that, like, I think that humanity is interesting. And what I also see is that, like, these broad stroke policy things that we've done in the past are not going to be working in the future. I think that governance and all these things will be a lot more nuanced, and you'll see a flavor of all of these things governing people the best. Like, obviously, socialized medicine is a win But in the US, we think that it should be totally privatized. And I'll tell you what, like nobody should have to pay $30,000 to have a baby. And that's what we have going on here in the States. That's not sustainable, right? You obviously need some sort of mixture of a private system with some sort of socialized system for medicine, because this is some ridiculous shit. I was like, 30,000 to have a baby in some places? That's not even. Why is that? That's
I know. I just had a baby. Well, I didn't. My wife did. But like,
how much did it? If you don't mind, Corey, how much did it cost you?
I don't even know. I have no idea. I didn't.
So I think I agree
on
with you to an extent. I don't think socialized medicine is the solution.
Maybe I'm broad stroking when I say that. All I'm saying is that there has to be more nuance if we want to progress as people, as human beings. There had to be more nuance than, like throwing everything under one umbrella of socialism or communism or capitalism or this. Like, we have to start to develop some nuance in how we policy and change these things.
Here's the thing, right? Like, so like I want to like almost piggyback on what Yago was just saying, right? And that previously you didn't have a choice. Your choice was to give up what I would consider basic human rights for convenience. And you had no other option, really. If you wanted to do the thing, then you did the thing. And what we're seeing now, especially as this technology has gotten better and more usable. I mean, like when we started this podcast, Bitcoin was hard to use. That's why everyone told us to go screw off. And they couldn't do anything with it. And what we're seeing now is a lot of options, and certainly we're above the threshold of legitimacy to where you no longer have to make that choice. And that fundamental, like, pigeonholed choice of trade-off for convenience is no longer the case, where you can do what you want to do while maintaining your privacy, security, and freedom. So you can do things that are convenient while being in control of things, and we're making that process way easier. It's going to get to the point where it's probably even going to be easier than using the traditional financial system to do these things. As it currently stands, getting a loan in crypto is orders of magnitude easier than getting a loan in the traditional financial system.
Yeah,
and
it is.
The only real roadblocks that you have are when you're going to have to end up paying taxes in your local jurisdictions, if you get it audited or something like that. The process of doing it and getting the money is very simple. But like dealing with your legal system is not. And hopefully that gets easier too. But like what I think is very important here is that people have options. They're no longer pigeonholed into something that doesn't work for them. They have options, and a lot of those options that I think people like Yago are building, and the rest of this community, are ones that are trending towards your best case scenario in being greedy is beneficial to the community, as opposed to you don't have a choice, but you're benefiting a small group of people. So like traditional financial system is, here's your option. It kind of sucks, but it's the only way you can do it. And it's going to benefit this guy over here, where he has like an incredibly asymmetric amount of power in this ecosystem. Whereas now it's like, do whatever you want. It's probably going to benefit whoever, like the majority of the people. Otherwise it wouldn't work so far.
Yeah.
So we
I
have
love
a few
it.
more questions. A few more like tidy up questions that we ask everybody. Do you want to hit him with it?
Yeah, I mean, I have more about Sovryn, but maybe next time. Maybe there'll be an episode 2. We'll just wrap. We've been going a little while. The first question is for our third host who couldn't make it, Jesse. But he asks all of our guests, is what you do actually hard?
What do I do hard?
Yeah, is it difficult?
Is what I'm doing hard? Is that the question?
is what you do actually hard? That's the question.
I mean, it certainly feels hard. Like I don't sleep very much, and I'm constantly stressed. And I mean, what we are building with Sovryn is basically an entire financial operating system, right? So imagine a world in which Bitcoin is the reserve asset. What does the financial system built around that monetary system look like? There's powerful. A lot of moving parts to what we're building. I mean, bridges, roll-ups, we already discussed, but lending systems, margin trading systems, just general trading systems, making it easy for people to have access through easy on ramps, use any wallet. There's like millions and millions of moving parts, and part of the role that I've taken with the community is trying to coordinate between the many different teams that are working on this and trying to keep it all in my head so that people aren't duplicating efforts unnecessarily. So yeah, I think it's hard. I wish I was smarter.
That's a great answer, man. And I really like that because like it goes to show, like, people ask me, I guess people that know me for a long time, my personal life, they ask me, do you really think Bitcoin will be the reserve currency of the world? And I always say yes. And they say, how? And I'm like, I don't know how this shit works. I just think yes. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I mean,
You didn't say why. You just said
yeah. You know? And so I like that you're actually saying, okay, how does that happen? How do we provide the tools for that to happen? How do we provide the human network and the human capital for that to happen? So you're answering very, very tough questions. So the other question that we ask is, in 10 words or less, can you describe Bitcoin?
Yeah, Bitcoin is the measure of value in the same way that a meter is a measure of length, or a liter, or if you're American, gallon is a measure of volume. It doesn't have value in and of itself, which is what makes it the most powerful way to measure value, because it's objective.
A measure of value. That's 4 words. 3 if you don't count the article A, but 4 words. That's pretty good and that's concise. And Corey, that's what I was going to say earlier, is that like that's the beauty of the game that Yago was talking about, is that even when the USD gets inflated into being toilet paper, the purchasing power of Bitcoin is what remains its measure of incentivizing everyone to continue to love it. Because it's like, oh, wait a second, 1,000th of a Bitcoin can get you a house? Yeah, I'm definitely not gonna give up my Bitcoin. I'm definitely gonna think Bitcoin is awesome, right?
Actually,
So
can I change my answer and repeat something I said earlier?
Too late. Never
you're
can.
breaking the rules. You're breaking the rules. No,
Okay.
no.
I'm gonna do it anyway. I'm gonna say
do you got?
Bitcoin is the one good decision you need to make for our generation.
I like that. That's a clippable. I wish we were streaming. You'd be like, clip that, guys. Clip it. I see streamers do that all the time.
So we'll clip it. We'll clip it and put it out.
Yeah,
We're
clip
going
that.
to be doing those anyway now, because like we'll probably be like doing some extra content based on clips of videos. So Yago, thanks for coming on. I look forward to seeing Sovryn grow. I look forward to using it. Anything you want to leave the audience with, like where to find you, what to do, anything at all?
Yeah, I mean, if I sometimes tweet on at Edan Yago on Twitter. I encourage you guys to get involved and try out Sovryn. So that's Sovryn.app. And most of all, thanks so much for taking the time and having me on your show.
It was fun. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Are you working in a job that sucks balls? Does your job suck and ergo your life? Do you want to change that because your life is sucking? Join the TBP Slack. Get a better job.